In southern Ohio and northern West Virginia, the legend of Mothman is as strong as it was 45 years ago.
And this is where all of your Mothman sightings started back in 66, November 66.
Now time for some interactive fun.
It feels like I haven't recorded a podcast episode in a while. Like sitting down to record this, I was having a mini guilt trip. It was like in my head, I was like, I haven't done this in a while. What's wrong with me? But it's kind of been a couple days. The back and forth between going with different subject ideas instead of just one continuous back-to-back episode is kind of probably messing with my mind. But that means I'm still Kirk, and that means this is Dumb Test Late. And even though it's Sunday night, I'm recording this on Sunday night, it's not a cake episode. Because I really haven't had any creative flow or whatever you want to call that towards my cake story recently. I haven't done like any watch lists or reading lists or anything. And it's kind of a good thing because the last episode I did was a cake one. I've been kind of thrown off with the dates because, like I said on the last cake episode, I am a master procrastinator. So the days are kind of shifted, but that means no cake, but you have insects. So kind of the same thing, but no. That means this is the Insecta story, the continuation of my Insecta story. This one has really been on my mind because I've gone down the dark path of comic book collecting. It took me all of 40 years. Before this, I've literally had one comic book my whole life that I've read front to back many times. It was like on a road trip somewhere when I was little. And we stopped at some kind of rest stop, and my sister bought me a random comic book to read on the road trip. It was a Wolverine centric comic book where it talked about his past life in Canada. And that's the most I remember of it. And that's the only other comic book I've had. But going through this whole story process of trying to get references and trying to get background on ideas I have and more, there's a saying, if you want to be a writer, you need to read. I want to be a creative person. I don't know what this project will ever lead to, but I'm doing the things of listening to podcasts about insects, watching shows about insects, watching sci-fi. Like I said, my past episodes, I watched The Fly. I've watched all these movies, and it just led me to comic book collecting because there's a Mothman comic series. There's a comic I picked up called The Fly. There's all these things. There's all these sci-fi and horror and creepy things I've gone down the avenue of with comic books, and that's led me to, like I said, the dark path of being a comic book collector. Because I've been away from comic books my whole life, and I'm just jumping into them now. You'll see one that's like, oh, that's interesting. And then you realize it's like the third one in the series. So you have to go back and get the old ones, and you realize, oh, there's another version that happened years ago that I have to go get this series. And like I said, I'm on the dark path of comic book collecting, but it has been adding to my creativity and my influences because, like I said, I've never been a comic book reader in my life. So I'm new to the way stories flow in comics. Even if you've never read a comic book, you can visualize or like come up with the way you think a story will flow. But the good thing about comics is there's so many different people creating comics, and it's not just the art, but the storytelling and the stories and the random, like, it's not just, Marvel and DC comics. It's not just Batman, Superman. I've gone down in the depths of so many indie comics, which I love because I love these weird off-beaten stories. And it feels like comics, since they've been going on so long, and it's kind of this open-ended storytelling, like you don't, like if you want to tell a superhero story, you don't have to tell either a Superman or a Batman or a Marvel story. With comics, you could create very interesting and in-depth characters. And I really love that because that's one of the things I want to get from doing this podcast is go deep dives into building characters and building enemies and building heroes and building stories. That's why I said comics have led me down a dark path, but I like it. And that leads me to, for my Insecta story, one of the reading lists that I needed to do for research, my homework. I think I mentioned it on the last Insecta story I did. I got, there's a comic series by Frank Frazetta. Let's go with that. On Opus Comics, called Mothman. And I just finished reading those. It's only three comic books. I'll say that. I thought, because usually, like, this is what I'm learning with comics, usually 5 or 6 main ones in a story arc. But this one came out last year, and I read all 3. That's the thing that's frustrating with me in comic books. Like I said, I've been out of it so long. I'll find something that'll look interesting, and I'll start reading it and realize, oh, I'm missing this comic book. I'm missing this and this background thing. But the good thing with this Mothman one, since it's fairly recent, I went to my local comic book store, and they had all the issues. There's like, variant covers and all that. But I'm not a collector in this. I'm want to read these for the story's sake. But like I said in my last episode, Mothman will be a key guidance figure in my Insecta story, with Cole being kind of my version of Mothman will be kind of a guide to Cole. I wanted to read this comic, even though this comic, they take kind of the usual background of the Mothman. Like in this series, it's a straight up alien that looks like a moth. And they're from a universe, a world, a galaxy, whatever, where there's a whole bunch of, their species or whatever they're made of look like insects. And the Mothman, or the moth person, will say, they just call him a Mothman in this story, crashes on the Earth by accident in a flying saucer spaceship, and craziness ensues because it's straight up. They crash in West Virginia, and it's in the middle of kind of a turf war between local gangs in West Virginia, and all this craziness ensues. The only part I can relate to is there's a character in the Mothman comic series that is a podcaster, and that he thinks he's much bigger than he really is, because there's a part where he gets pulled over by a police officer, and he's kind of bragging about doing a podcast, and the police officer is, it says like, all the 35 listeners you have, and they're gonna hit home pretty hard, because I guess I'm pretty sure I have less than 35 listeners. But taking Mothman as an alien is not something I'm really going to use for my story. Mothman, that's a good thing about Mothman. There's so many different folklore. There's so many different backgrounds you can pull from. For me, my Mothman is going to be, like I said, a guide for my main character, Cole, in this story. And that kind of leads me something I made a note on, and I didn't cover it on the last Insecta episode. There's something called egregore, egregore, egregore. Thank goodness. That's a weird word to say out loud, egregore. But it's kind of this belief that it's like a hive mind or autonomous. That's another hard word to say. I want to say belief system or something, where it's this one entity that could be made up of, like I said, a hive mind, of a group energy think that can create kind of this entity of psychic energy. I can't read my own notes. I'm sorry. So it's a hive mind or a group thing, a group energy that can be used to create this one entity that's made up of psychic energy. And that's where I think I'm going to take my Mothman folklore. And that's kind of the reasons why there's these big jumps. If you look up or read or listen to the whole timeline of Mothman folklore, it jumps from like years to years to years. And it's always based around these tragic events. Like that's why you get the Mothman prophecies. The sightings are related to these disastrous events. So that's going to be part of my folklore, is that the Mothman isn't one entity. It's not just one. I was told the Mothman probably isn't a cryptid, and I shouldn't categorize them as a cryptid, which is fair to say, but we all call things different things. But the Mothman, okay, stay on track. For me, the Mothman isn't going to be one person. It's not going to be a thing. It's not going to be an alien. It's not going to be some weird experiment that escaped from a lab in the 60s. Nothing like that. For me, my Mothman is going to be built up of this egregore. The Mothman is going to be an egregore. That's why I said their sightings jump from years, so they go back in hiding and a couple of years later they pop out, or it's in different places. The Mothman can hibernate for a long time. And this is going to go back to the whole insect and cocoon thing, because when a caterpillar goes into a cocoon, it basically destroys itself. It basically liquefies itself, and it gets rebuilt as a moth or a butterfly or whatever it's transforming to. That's going to lend to my Mothman folklore. When this collective hive mind kind of gets triggered or something, it's over years and years and decades of decades, it's building up the Mothman in its cocoon. And when it leads to something disastrous going to happen, that's when the Mothman gets reborn. And it's different every time based on the egregore that's going on, the psychic energy that's being built up inside of this cocoon that's changing the Mothman every time. So this version of the Mothman is going to look very different because it's present day than the sightings in the 60s and the 80s. And supposedly there was a sighting before 9/11. So for my story, it's going to look very different because the egregore, the combined energy that goes into building it, it's different every time. But there's a disastrous event. So the disastrous event is going to be, it's Nurgle, the main enemy in my story, is going to be wanting to trigger this huge human plague. Like COVID, it's going to be post-COVID. COVID was a test. COVID was the first attempt at a plague, but humans triumphed in creating, a vaccination. And for the most part, we did what we were supposed to do with, distancing and all the things and living cleaner lives and all this, that we kind of kept COVID still around, but you can get a shot for COVID. You can get cured. You can get an inhaler that cures COVID. We defeated it. But like I said, that was the first test for Nurgle. Nurgle is the kind of evil god of human plagues. So he's pushing for this next plague, and then that kind of leads to the resurrection of Mothman. So Mothman in my story is going to be built up of all these different things, this psychic energy, this egregore, and it's going to not be just one person. It's going to be a combination of all these things, and that's how it appears to my main character, Cole, because it's going to be the new prophecy. So it's going to come to Cole because Cole is, whether they know it or not, a shaman, and they can be lent in different ways. And the Mothman doesn't have a good or a bad side. The Mothman is just there for the prophecy. It's just there to lead Cole. It's going to be the spiritual guidance to Cole because it was resurrected from this egregore of psychic energy. Maybe the Mothman has this far history where they were created from Nurgle or another Greek or Mesopotamian god, and they've, they can get resurrected from years and years and years. Yeah, that's what I said. I'm sorry that I keep saying that's what I say. This is what I'm saying. This is how I'm going to build up the backstory of the Mothman. My my version, let's say that my version of the Mothman is going to come to Cole and kind of lend its backstory to the world, because Cole is just living in present day. Cole doesn't know any of this that's going on. And also that was my egregore, the backstory of my version of the Mothman that I'm going to have in this story, but it's not going to be a Mothman story. The Mothman is going to be the background and the guidance and kind of the storyteller to the story as Cole learns about their fate and their background and all this stuff. The other part of my story that I found, like I through research and just through listening through things, is something I'm thinking of. I want to add to my story, my Insecta Cole story. I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to do it, but it's called Parthenogenesis. And it's where animals, and for my story's sake, mainly insects, can reproduce asexually. So there's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be something where my character Cole, because the way I envision my character Cole, there's going, like I said before on previous episodes, they're not the hero, they're not the villain yet. You see them being pushed and pulled in different ways and seeing this background of a more villainous side or a dark side or a good side. As the Mothman is their spiritual guidance. They're their Yoda to like pushing them not in either direction, but making them stronger. So when it's time for my character Cole to make a decision, they can be more confident about it. But like I said, Parthenogenesis, I'm thinking it's going to play a part because my character Cole, that's what I was saying. My character Cole, the way I envision them, not either being already a hero or a villain yet, is going to kind of play simultaneously with their character design, because I kind of want to make them non-binary or like non-gender conforming, or maybe they're trans or something where it parallels with the story with insects being able to reproduce asexually. My character either is going through a transformation, as like I said, they'll be transgender, or they'll be, leaning somewhere with no gender. They're just a person in this world. And that kind of plays in harmony at the same time with them having to choose this light side, this dark side, this good side, this to be a hero, to be a villain. That's going to play at the same time with them, especially with the thing with the cocoon, when the caterpillar goes into the cocoon and basically destroys itself to come out as something else. That transformation is going to play some way with Cole, my character in this. I don't 100% know because I don't 100% understand. It's very scientific. But of course I listened to a podcast about it. But since this whole story is going to be based around the spiritual world and the insect world and the human world and Earth, I want to have all these different elements, because I honestly am totally fascinated with the insect world. Like, think about that. There's insects, there's animals, there's fish, there's all these things that could just reproduce asexually. How amazing is that? They could just pop up and just one day be like, I'm going to have some babies. I don't need anybody. I'm going to have babies on my own. That's amazing. And maybe that's something my character Cole can have to deal with. Maybe the prophecy that the Mothman is coming to them for, something that they may have to reproduce asexually and they have no control of it, or because that goes back to the Mothman comic I just read, that the Mothman, sorry for the spoiler, but the Mothman in the series, the comic book series that I'm reading, has a child. That's the last comic book that's out, and they hop on their alien ship and fly off with the child and a human person, one of the characters. That reminded me about the Parthenogenesis part with insects in this story. But I'm gonna figure out that if it's, because I like that idea. It adds like scientific to the spiritual world, to this fantasy comic book world. I like having those things combined, or you take from this what you like about it and add it to a fantasy world. Adding both science and fantasy and spirituality and all this stuff is amazing. And that's like all background. If this ever becomes a real story, it might be just one single line where it's mentioned. But, I like doing the background work for these stories. But yeah, that's what I have so far. I haven't felt like too creative recently. Maybe it's because I've been spending all my mental capacity in collecting comics. But that's fine. I like having this inspiration from reading all these especially the indie comics where there's all these crazy and different stories. I really like that. It's all inspiration. Like someone said before, it was me. If you want to be a writer, you got to read. Because I don't know what this story, my Insecta Cole story, is going to ever be. Will it be a book? Maybe I'll make a comic book. Maybe I'll make it into a movie. Maybe it'll be a TV show. Maybe it'll be nothing. Who knows? But I still like working on this. The important part is staying in the creative mode and creating. That's all you can ever do. That's all you can ever do. You can think about stuff and you can do stuff. All that other thing, if this will be successful, this will turn it, I have no control over that. All I can control is right now. Me talking, rambling on, watching Audacity go. And since I said I'm rambling on, that means I should wrap it up. But thanks for listening. Hopefully on the next one, I'll be back with Cake. The next story, the next episode you see in the podcast feed. Thanks for listening for this one. I don't know where you're listening to this on. Hopefully I have this podcast out on a bunch of different feeds. But yeah, I didn't use AI. I'm giving AI a rest. I'm using my own brain power. That's why I ramble so much, because I'm using my own brain power. My brain is like sputtering. But yeah, I'm still Kirk. This is still Dumb Test Late. Thanks for listening wherever you listen to this one. Don't forget, I have a website if you ever want to see. If you ever can't find more episodes or something, I put them all up there. Links to everything, the images, the AI images I do generate for the show based on my ideas and all this stuff is there. And I'm on Instagram. I think I'm on Twitter. I don't use Twitter. I think I'm on Blue Sky too. But yeah, look it up. Just Dumb Test Late. Look it up. You'll find me somewhere. I don't know. Maybe I'm around the corner. Who knows? But yeah, thanks for listening. The next one will probably be the cake. Well, hopefully I'll get back to my cake story. But yeah, this isn't the Insecta story. But thanks for listening. Bye.